It's the 30th of April 1980, and 6 terrorists are about to storm the Iranian Embassy in Princess Gate, Knightsbridge, London. It's the beginning of a story that will captivate the world and lead down the line to a best-selling book by Ben Macintyre called The Siege. In this episode of the History Book Buffs, Roger and I are talking about The Siege and recommending another couple of books along the same lines. So don't forget, like us, subscribe on YouTube, follow wherever you get your podcasts to keep getting great chat about brilliant history books. So, Roger, we're here to talk today about Ben Macintyre's brilliant book, The Siege, which I suspect a number of our listeners and watchers have actually already read. But we were both new to it. We're behind the curve, which is not an unusual place for us to be.
No, always perennially behind the curve. Never knowingly up to date is what one might say. And to be fair, you know, we're really inspired by watching his presentation at Chalk Valley, weren't we? Because he was so good, so polished. You know, we said at the time, you know, we should all just stop messing about trying to publicise our books and just get Ben Mac to do it instead, on our behalf. You know, so you know, inspired by that, we thought we'd cover the book. And to be fair, it hasn't disappointed, has it?
It hasn't at all. No, wonderful book. And also, unusually, like we went to a couple of talks and felt that having been to the talk, there was no need to buy the book.
Yeah.
But Ben Macintyre manages to do a wonderful talk about his book in a way that makes you just run out and buy a signed copy immediately. And one for your dad.
Yeah, I mean, just Witchcraft, really. It's sort of author Witchcraft, because he didn't stint on the information. He gave us all the information and rundown in almost blow by blow of the embassy siege, and you still were desperate to queue up and buy the book afterwards. So yeah, I don't know quite how he did that, but he did. And there's only one moment in that talk, I think, where he said, you know, if you want this detail, you have to read the book. I think he only pulled that trick once.
He did. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, it was.
But let's get into it. So the 30th of April, 1980, Roger, it is a red letter day because the young Antonio Senior was at home with tonsillitis that day. Now, this is relevant information.
Right. I mean, I can't remember what I was doing on the 30th of April, 1980, but yeah, it wasn't as interesting as your 30th of April, 1980. So tell us, do.
Well, I was at home in bed with tonsillitis and knocking back the Lucozade, as one did when one had tonsillitis in the 1980s.
Is that medicine?
It may as well have been. And all my little friends at nursery school were happily in the class doing their, like, you know, whatever.
Latin, Greek.
Yeah, exactly. This was a Knightsbridge nursery school, Roger Morehouse. And on that morning, 30th of April, when I was luckily at home under my duvet, missing history, the building next door... Yeah, not for the first time. The building next door to my nursery school was taken over by 6 terrorists.
Brilliant.
Can you imagine?
And you missed it all.
I missed it all. I was at home, which is actually really lucky, because I spoke to my mother about it before recording this podcast, and she says that her memory of it is that, you know, the women that she knew, the other mothers, all got like these calls saying, you know, we need to evacuate the school, and they turn up. And
there's a police cordon.
There's police everywhere. It's like, you know, Ben Macintyre's book is absolutely brilliant at doing a kind of minute by minute what's happening. And what is happening is, as soon as basically the gunmen barrel in, there's a policeman on the door called Trevor Lock, and he's left his post to have a cup of coffee. And they barrel in and they take him out, and then they're in there, but Trevor Lock manages to set off a kind of emergency procedure. So it's really, really quick that the police know that there's something amiss, right? So just, sorry, briefly to finish the story of my not being there.
It's all about you so far.
It is all about me. It's all about me. So yeah, the mums were like held in a pen as the police were trying to work out what was going on, and the children, it took ages to get them out because they didn't know quite how to do it or where to put them. And you know, my mother, God love her, she's probably going to listen to this. She is not a woman with the most sort of robust nerves where her children are concerned, and I've inherited that in my gosh, if it was my children, I would be absolutely having kittens. So luckily for the senior family, I was in bed with tonsillitis rather than my mum behind a police cordon losing her mind as a bunch of terrorists were threatening
Few.
the
So,
life of her.
you know, after putting yourself firmly at the centre of events, Senior, let's now look at the real story.
I'm sorry. I thought that's what we were doing. Wow.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
So
Yeah.
low.
Yeah.
So low. Okay. So these 6 terrorists have stormed the embassy and they've taken various hostages. Among them are a number of characters who Ben is going to follow as the book goes through, and as I say, a very kind of minute by minute kind of unfolding drama. Among the more memorable, there's Trevor Lock, the policeman that we were talking about at the beginning. Now, Trevor Lock has got a police issue pistol, which the terrorists managed to miss, right? They kind of pat him down, but he's wearing this kind of bulky policeman's jacket and they miss. So he keeps his
He was wearing
gun.
2 jumpers, I remember. Because it was a cold morning and his wife made him wear 2 jumpers.
I know,
nice
his lovely wife, Doreen,
yeah.
who is also a character in the story. So there's Trevor Lock. There are 2 journalists in there at the beginning. One of them's called Sim Harris, who's a BBC sound engineer, and his colleague Chris. And then there's various sort of Iranian officials from the embassy. There's a secretary called Roya Kagachi who is going to go on to be instrumental in keeping all the hostages kind of calm, particularly the women. And
there was one called Frida who kept fainting.
Yes. And the guy who sort of the British guy who sort of runs the embassy, whose name is Ron Morris, and he basically spends a lot of time in the ensuing days making cups of tea.
In a very British way, stoic in his tea making.
And so the fascinating thing about this book is Ben sets out to very compassionately look at how different people responded to this moment of extreme peril, and how some people responded with, you know, a mixture of kind of stoicism and terror. Other people were just unbelievably brave. Other people were kind of absolutely floored by it. But he's very compassionate because obviously none of us know how we would react in that.
And he makes that point at the end, doesn't he? That it's one of those moments where you sort of, or people reveal their inner strength, or conversely their inner lack of strength in a moment like this. It's one of those testing moments.
Exactly, and it was such luck for some of them, whether they were there or not. So the 2 journalists happened to be there trying to get a visa. There's a Pakistani guy who's there. Basically, he's a tourist in London for a few days and he ends up there for weird circumstances, and he just happens to be in there when they're, you know, so it's luck. You know, one day you might, for example, Roger Morehouse, have tonsillitis and not be at school when terrible things happen, right? For example.
Yes, the fickle finger of fate did not point at you on that morning of the 30th of April 1980, did it, Senior?
Although this would be a much better podcast had I actually been there. So in one sense, the fickle finger of fate was not my friend that day. Ma Senior's, you know, calm heart was a bonus, but here, many years down the line, I could have been like, well, as I was ushered out by the police.
Yes, but sadly, you know, you had tonsillitis, so...
I know. But listen, one member of the nursery school that I was at, one member of the community was left behind in the evacuation, and that was our Gerbil, Nibbles. And Ben talks about the Gerbil because it's a brilliant part of the story. Because because one of the things he does so brilliantly is he looks at the kind of press reaction. So obviously this hostage crisis kicks off, the police get involved, very soon the press are alerted, and then suddenly the world's press are descending on this on this little part of London looking for stories, and after a little bit they've kind of run out of stuff to say, because it's like, you can't, they can't see anything happening, and the hostages are inside, and for a long time nobody knows what's happening to them. So one of the stories that sort of crops up is, how is Nibbles the Gerbil faring in this terrible... And then just to finish nursery related things, it is quite funny. So the police originally set up camp in this building next to the embassy that's owned by like the Royal College of Embroiderers or something.
Needlework, isn't it?
Needlework.
Needlework.
And there's like priceless tapestries everywhere, and the police are really pissed off that they're in here because they can't smoke, right? Because everywhere they go there's like a priceless tapestry. So they decide to move them to the nursery school, but then they get in there. And of course, because it's a nursery school, like when they first get in there, all the policemen are trying to sit on those funny little chairs.
We've all been there. We've all been there for parents' evening.
Yeah, exactly. And then when they were trying to use the urinals, they had to like kneel on.
But crucially, how did Nibbles get on? Everyone wants to know.
Well, listen, I mean, I think we should take a note from Ben Mack's book and just put in a cryptic sentence here, like, the fate of Nibbles hung in the balance. Tell people at the end of the podcast what happened to Nibbles.
Yeah,
that's how Ben would do it.
That's how he'd do it. Yeah, so tune in at the end, people.
Right. So listen, why don't we say something about who these terrorists are and why they are taking over the embassy?
Now, this surprised me, because I mean I'm slightly longer in the tooth than you are, so I can remember it in real time. I wasn't at home with tonsillitis. I can remember it in real time, admittedly as a what would I have been, 12-year-old, I suppose. But I never actually thought. I don't think I was ever told who had carried it out. I don't remember ever thinking about who had carried it out. I knew about it, but I never, it just never was an issue, and I just assumed it was Iranian dissidents.
They're just generic terrorists.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Iranian Revolution happened. Iran was it was in the news a lot. You've got the U.S. embassy in Tehran, sieges going on at the same time, and that was sort of big news. And then this happens. You think, oh, it's just another sort of chapter of Middle East craziness being inflicted on us. And I never gave it a second thought. And then again, it was the presentation we listened to. Very specific group of people. It was the Iranian Arab minority who felt betrayed. They'd been persecuted under the Shahs, and they had aligned themselves with the Islamic Revolution and said, this is our way to freedom. And then, of course, once the Ayatollahs came to power, they essentially turned around and said, well, we don't need you guys anymore, so we're just going to carry on the same oppressive policies that had been done under the Shahs. So they had been effectively stabbed in the back. Then you've got Saddam next door, egging them on, giving them funds and giving them all sorts of help, and saying, go on, go and destabilize Iran for me. And it's those guys, Iranian Arabs, fighting for the liberation of Khuzestan, as they call it, which is basically, or Arabistan, which is basically the Arab district of southwestern Iran. And they're the guys that do it. And all of this, I thought, my God, I've never actually heard that. I've never heard in my however many years it's been, 45 years since, I've never actually heard that explanation. So I thought that was very interesting, because part of their rationale for doing it was to get their story out to the Western world, to say we put a hand up and say we're being persecuted here, and no one's paying us any attention, no one's listening. And the fact, I'm sure there are many people like me that have never known this. So yeah, their message still didn't get out.
Well, that's one of the things that's really beautifully done in the book. So the leader of the hostages is a guy whose name is, his code name that they use is Salim, right? And Salim, his brother, who he adored, like his whole family had been undone by persecution from the Shah's secret police, and then his brother had been, who he adored, had been like brutally murdered and tortured. And this felt for him like a kind of last act of, you know, agency in a world where he had backed the Ayatollah and then just watched as the same discrimination was meted out to his Arab contemporaries. So all through the crisis, which lasts 6 days, he keeps trying to get his message out, and the media organizations under orders basically are not broadcasting his demands, and he cannot. And he gets angrier and angrier, and he keeps setting these deadlines like, unless you tell the world why we are doing this, I am going to kill a hostage. And then he doesn't really want to kill a hostage, so then he changes the deadline, and then the cycle starts again. And you can watch him getting more and more on edge. And one of the things that I thought was super brilliantly done is Ben talks a lot in the book about both Stockholm syndrome and Lima syndrome. So Stockholm syndrome is where you're held hostage and you start identifying with your captors and sort of feeling great empathy towards them and their cause, and then you feel like you're on the same side against the authorities outside who seem to be the ones who are making this situation worse, right? And also Lima syndrome, which is the opposite, which is where the people taking the hostages, this is based on a hostage situation that had happened in Lima, Peru, that the people taking the hostages get invested in their hostages and then find it difficult to mete out any violence towards them, right? So what's incredibly clever about how Ben writes the book is that as a reader, you develop a form of Stockholm syndrome, because you start absolutely empathizing with these young men.
He does make the point that they go into it. I mean, you mentioned about the leader Salim, who's kind of is perhaps more predisposed to violence because of his background than the others, but a lot of them, they weren't expecting to die in the process. They were expecting to get their message out, and then be able to take a flight back to somewhere that they considered safe, which realistically was probably Iraq or somewhere. But they just, they're what they were trying to do was to hold up a megaphone and say, look, we're suffering here, guys. They didn't want to start shooting people. They didn't want to die themselves. That's what they were trying to do, right? So it's interesting that he does go into that in such detail that, as you say, you do end up kind of in a slightly odd way sympathizing with them at the end. They were young boys who were, trying to do their best for a cause and didn't get anything that they wanted in the end.
Yes, absolutely. And so what Ben does is tell it in such sort of detail and with such an eye for character that you're so invested in both the hostages and the terrorists that when the last play comes, which we know is going to come because we all, even those of us who were too small and ill with tonsillitis to watch it at the time, know that the SAS are going to go barreling in. When they do, and Ben tells that story in a minute by minute kind of set piece at the end, it is breathtaking. I could barely breathe as I was reading it. Honestly, I don't say that lightly. I was so transfixed. It was almost like an out of body experience reading it. It was absolutely extraordinary.
And he does write fantastically well. I mean, I completely agree, and I think that's the genius of what he's done is to make you really understand who the people are, to really identify with them and appreciate how that, which is very difficult. There's a little grain, if I may, there's a little grain of doubt here for me. That a couple of things that I read in there where he's setting it up. There was one of the policemen, I think it was, one of the senior policemen involved outside in the response to the siege, and he said at one point, this was a man who polished his shoes, to a beautiful luster every Sunday night before work on Monday morning. And I read that and I thought, okay, I mean, it gives you a good impression of who that guy is, right? It says a lot, shorthand. But is that, did he say that? Is that in his diary? He drew some of those characters, particularly the hostages and the terrorists. they're so well drawn. Like they're and even their motivations and their inner thoughts and all that, they're so well drawn. Like he seems to know them better than I know some of my friends, as to what goes on inside their heads. And I just thought, yeah, is that fair? Is that right? I'm not sure.
I think that what you're identifying is that there are two schools of practice in modern narrative non-fiction, right? There's the Ben Macintyre school, which, for argument's sake, let's call it faction, okay? Because this is the school where you tell a story that is really well researched, really thoroughly and deeply researched, but you don't shy away from sometimes embellishing a bit of dialogue or using your writerly intuition based on your very good and deep understanding of the subject to kind of
and of human nature as well,
and of human nature, to give it some propulsion, to give it some welly, to push it forward, to make it as unbelievably gripping as it can be, right? The second camp of popular narrative non-fiction is more rigorous in detailing every source. You're unlikely to get many direct quotes unless they're from a journal or, from something that's evidence like a speech or whatever. Everything is
and you certainly don't
referenced.
really get, their inner emotional being, because there's nobody ever really expresses that, right?
No, unless you happen to have a diary. Or a memoir, which actually you probably treat relatively skeptically if you're in this camp anyway. So I think, so you very, very firmly, as a writer of popular non-history, fall into the second camp, right? You're a narrative historian, but every detail is sourced, and you wouldn't, none of your characters would kind of think longingly about their mothers as the U-boat circles, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I enjoy the sort of the constriction of that, if you like. That you're trying to write something that is as dramatic as possible and as engaging as possible, but within those strictures of that you can't embellish, and you can't, even if you can't say it's a sunny day unless you have evidence that it's a sunny day. So everything has to be sort of sourced and so on, which is slightly kind of masochistic in its approach, but I quite like that. I quite like trying to do the best you can within those restrictions. And then it's interesting that, that's, I suppose, what we're talking about with Ben Mac. It's a bit more of a journalistic approach, I suppose. It's a bit looser. But what you do get as a positive, from the reader's perspective, is that you get that depth of character.
You get the depth of character, but you also get the narrative propulsion, right? That character drives everything. It drives the plot, it drives everything, which means that, but it's the same principle with great fiction, right? So the character comes first, the plot comes second, but the two are like linked, and they push you through, and they make you want to read, and they make you turn the page. And I think it's almost impossible to get that level of narrative propulsion if you're in the second camp, if you're in your camp.
That's true. I think that's true.
The downside of the Macintyre camp, the faction camp, if you like, faction is maybe not the right word, because I'm not implying it's made up, because it's not made up. But if you're in that camp, I think
it sort of blurs the boundaries a bit. It does blur
the boundaries a bit, and what you're having to do, I think, as a reader, is give absolute trust to the writer that they've got this right. Because there's no way of, there's no reference about John Dello buffing his shoes, right? There's no so there was one bit where, for example, two of the terrorists are having a conversation in the corridor, which is in direct speech, where one of them says, I don't fancy this, and the other one says, oh, carry on, it's all going to be fine. And you're like, well, I'm not sure that there's any way of if nobody ever heard that, like, this is conjecture. So in Ben Macintyre's hands, what you end up with is an incredibly propulsive, really high selling book that tells a story that's important, and you trust his intuition to get these things right. I think there is a danger when people who are not as competent or as rigorous as Ben take the same approach, right?
Yeah, I
So
agree.
that's probably the caveat.
Yeah. And I suppose we have to ask as well, I wonder, at the end of the day, do most readers actually mind? Either way. They just want to read a good yarn that's well done, that's, the characters are well drawn. And at the end of the day, they can say, well, that's what happened, So
Yeah.
I don't think most people are that bothered, but it's one of those things that certainly, not red flags, but it kind of, made me raise an eyebrow when I was reading it. But that's because I come from a different school, as I say.
Yeah, you come from a different school, exactly. And I think both have their merits and both have their disadvantages.
No, I agree.
I think probably Ben's bank account's bigger than yours.
I without question. So who's winning here?
Yeah, you keep your principal's morehouse.
Yeah,
They'll
you
keep
sit with
you
the
warm
principals,
in
you
your old
loser.
age. But I would be really interested to know what our audience thinks. This is something I really, really want to get some opinions on. So if you've got an opinion, do drop us a comment, because I'd love to hear them.
Indeed.
And we've also got a couple of other books for you. So Roger, you've got a book that you want to recommend on the back of the siege.
I have Tom Petch. So it's sort of SAS, because obviously it's the SAS that go in and end the siege in spectacular style.
And free Nibbles.
And Nibbles, absolutely, and free Nibbles. I mean, obviously that's the main point of the entire narrative. By
the way, apparently, just briefly,
go on. You're not giving away Nibbles' fate now, are you?
Well, apparently, so when the SAS do go in, it's all a bit confused, and it really could have gone the other way. And Ben does that brilliantly. There's like fires and explosions and gunshots and stuff going wrong all over the shop. But luckily, it all comes. Well, I'll let you read the book. But poor Nibbles is so traumatized by all the gunfire and the smoke that he goes a bit mental, and he goes round and round on his hamster wheel, his gerbil wheel.
That's really sad.
I know. So he probably had post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, poor thing. I mean, he didn't ask to be there, did he?
Well, neither did I, Morehouse. And in fact, I wasn't. Anyway, carry on. Tom Petch.
So yeah, I mean, moving away from you, I'm going to recommend Tom Petch's Untold Secret Origins of the SAS, which is a kind of a rewrite. There's a lot of mythology around the SAS, particularly about its origins, and he goes back to the archives and tells a slightly different story about its origins. And it's very well done. And Tom himself is of that ilk. He is a very much an alpha in the male department, isn't he? He's a fine specimen of a man. So I couldn't not recommend his book, because he'd probably beat me up.
He could kill you, yeah.
He could kill me just by looking at me. So we have to recommend his book, Tom Petch. It's called Speed, Aggression, Surprise. See what he did there, SAS, The Untold Secret Origins of the SAS. So there we go. That's my recommendation.
Brilliant. My recommendation is a fiction book. So it's by Anne Patchett, who's an amazing writer, and it's called Bel Canto, and it's loosely based on the Lima hostage siege that gave rise to the Lima syndrome that we talked about earlier.
Yep.
And it's about a soprano who goes to sing at the Japanese ambassador's house, and they get taken over by terrorists, and a hostage situation
ensues. Was that The Shining
Path
or something like that? Was it them?
Do you know, it's a while since I read it, so I can't remember which terrorists. Generic terrorists.
Just terrorists, yeah.
Terrorists.
Bad people, yeah.
The bad guys.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful book. Anne Patchett's brilliant. And love it. Highly recommend
Wonderful. So there we go. So that, I mean, it is, going back to Ben Mac, it is such an absolute page turner. I'm delighting in reading it. So and I think you have as well, haven't you? So well worth your time.
I could not put it down. I almost recommended it to my mum, but then I thought, given that her near miss on that day,
too close to home. Too close to home.
Yeah. All right, next time.
Wonderful stuff. Next time. Take care. Bye.
Bye.